Wow. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the world famous Cinerama Dome in Hollywood. Sold out crowd for Echo in the Canyon. This is how we roll. What a special, special place to see this movie. And I've been moderating Q&As here for like almost 20 years, and I've never done one like this before. And I know what you're all thinking. So, where do we get the music? Well, it is out now. It is out now. Go on iTunes, you can download the entire album of Echo in the Canyon, which includes some songs that are not in the film. I'm not going to tell you what they are, because I don't want to spoil it. So make sure you do check out the album, and the music, as you've seen and heard just now, is beautiful. My name is Scott Nance, and I am so thrilled to be moderating this Q&A tonight, because in addition to being a movie fan, this music is my jam. So please welcome the producer and director of Echo in the Canyon, Andrew Slater. And also, please welcome to the stage executive producer and Grammy-winning singer-songwriter, Jacob Dylan. Well, so first of all, last night we had the premiere here, and this all went down last night, and it was really special. And this is something you're just never going to forget. But my question to Andrew is at what point did you start to feel like the music, like really paying tribute to this music, and then putting it together as a film? Like, when did you just really start to feel like that had to be done?
Well, we started really just to record music. I mean, I had no aspirations in the beginning to make a film. I just wanted to honor these songs. And Jacob and I mean, it was inspired by us sitting in my den trying to figure out what we were going to do, because we were both at a point in our lives, I think, where I wouldn't call it a transition. I mean, I had just left Capitol, which we would call us fired. And Jacob's band had just put a record out, and they had done, a long cycle of album tour, and we were looking to really figure out what we were going to do, and this movie came on, and it was Model Shop, Jacques Demy's movie, and it showed us all these places that we go to, like, all the time in this period of innocence, in '67. And so it set us back, like I said in the film, to explore the songs that sort of define that. And what we found was the collection of songs that had stories behind them. And we just were curious. Well, when you look at Going Back, or you look at Go Where You Want to Go, they all have interesting stories. And then it could have just been research. And we said, let's go ask everybody what it was really like. And that's how it started.
Jacob, a lot of the songs, I mean, there's some like hits, so to speak, like, In My Room, but, some of the, especially the songs by the Byrds, you didn't go with Tambourine Man, you didn't go with Turn, Turn, Turn. You went with deeper cuts, so to speak. What were you really looking to capture with the songs that you wound up performing for the film?
Well, first was a song that I would sound good singing. And then if we played into the narrative, that would be terrific. Once we decided it was going to be duets, some kind of dialogue within the lyric was important. And then, you're right, we didn't want to do the obvious songs, but I think most of you here probably know most of these songs anyhow. But it did seem instinctual to stay away from the obvious songs, the big hits.
Well, when you're reaching out to do these interviews, I mean, obviously, like David Crosby, Stephen Stills, those guys, but, for me, and obviously it's now become more profound because Tom Petty is just so eloquent when he's talking. He's such a fan because of the way that sound inspired his music. His cover version of I'll Feel a Whole Lot Better on Full Moon Fever is fantastic. But what was it like that day that you had with him? And where did you film that interview, I have to ask?
Any guitar players here? A couple. True Tone in Santa Monica. A great shot. They've always been nice to us. I mean, I've been going there forever. They closed it down for us so we could bring Tom in, which would only make sense. You're not going to bring Tom to Guitar Center at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I don't want to go 3 o'clock in the afternoon to Guitar Center either. But if we were to talk to Tom, it seemed like the right thing to do.
Was Roger McGuinn also at that? Was that McCabe's?
No, it's New York
City.
Oh, that was New York. Oh, okay. One thing that I really, really love about this film, among other things, is, obviously there's been so much written, so much film, so many documentaries about the Beatles. Same thing with the Beach Boys, the Stones, all those seminal bands from the 60s. But I always felt like the most underappreciated, overlooked band of that time, and definitely the most influential, is the Byrds. And the Byrds are an LA band. They played the Troubadour. And this movie, it feels, among other things, like the love letter to the Byrds that they were always doing.
Well, it all starts with the Byrds. I mean, it's funny, the electrification of folk music, I don't know if it would have happened in New York. Because in the 60s, I think, in that early period, the folk scene was so rigid. People didn't really want to veer from long songs and the storyteller. And when McGuinn sees A Hard Day's Night and he sees George playing the Rickenbacker, he picks that up and he electrifies folk music and, Bells of Rhymney and the other songs you were mentioning. And then that inspires George he hears that, inspires him to write If I Needed Someone, which goes on Rubber Soul, which Brian Wilson hears. And, then he writes Pet Sounds, and then the Beatles hear Pet Sounds and they do, Sgt. Pepper. And so, for us, it starts with the Byrds. We could go on and on about the Byrds. Each one of these bands is a documentary. I mean, we were just trying to find the story that was the most compelling, in the collection of songs. We started thinking, the story is really everyone moves from New York to LA. And as we talked to everybody, we realized that it became more about the magic that happened here. California is such an amazing place, and it represents a kind of freedom, and it's the ultimate horizontal city, and anything's possible. So I do have to say one thing. Having a film play in the Grand Canyon of movie theaters is so amazing. We're just so, Jake and I are sitting in the audience and just looking at it, and we've had this idea just to honor our city and the cultural things that drew us here. So it's just so great.
Andrew, it is sold out. So, thank you for this.
You make things from a personal place, and you hope they translate to Universal much better than trying to write Universal and hope it translates personal.
Okay, in fairness, it is actually a superhero film. Just like, that's what belongs in there. These people are superheroes.
Yes!
Real superheroes. In all these interviews you were doing, especially, Jacob, for the influence that these musicians had on you. Were you nervous doing some of these interviews? Were you just like, oh my God, it's Peter Crosby? Because, that's pretty cool.
I'm mostly always nervous anyhow. No big surprise. Well, going into it, sure, but once you sit with these people, there's a respected language. I'm an artist too, and that was. I think that if the interviews are especially interesting or separated from other interviews that these people do, it's just that I'm another artist. Mostly they sit with journalists, and they're a little cautious. They don't know what the angle is. I don't have any angle. They know that. So I just wanted to talk to them and have them say whatever they wanted to say. Nobody was pitching anything. I just started. But yes, of course. If I was to say I was not nervous sitting next to Eric Clapton, even though I've worked with him a number of times throughout the years, he's been very generous to me and my group and let me go out and play with him. It's still Eric Clapton.
But you played it cool.
He's cool. And also the thing is that we were trying to capture a conversation between two artists and two songwriters. And I think, in a sense, guys come in and they do their interview with a journalist and they're talking about the project that they've worked on at that moment. Here we had a little bit of looseness because people were talking about each other and they were talking to Jacob. And so, in a way, you feel like you're eavesdropping on a, personal conversation, which is so great to capture. And, that's what's there.
Well, doing all these interviews, you guys obviously know the music, the stories. It's in your blood. I mean, literally. So, pun intended, thank you.
Well, a lot of other shit too. Just the good stuff.
But what did you learn? Like what surprised you? Like when you're talking to these musicians, like what stories did they tell you that you didn't know? What discoveries did you make throughout this process? For each of you.
Well, I discovered how hard it is to make a documentary. That's what I discovered, and how much respect I have for documentary filmmakers, because it is no small task. You know, a lot of the stuff, I mean, we knew, like I knew people listened to each other, but I just didn't know the kind of sense of community and the humanity in their stories, you know, and how friendly they were. You know, at time, it was before, I think, it was about being a big star and making a lot of money, and you know, so it was about this different sentiment. And in filming this, you know, I was a journalist. You know, I started my career as a journalist, and I wasn't really very good. And the reason I wasn't very good is because I could never put on paper what people looked like and what they were sounding like when they were talking to me. So in doing this film, I wanted to have I wanted to be able to see the people. I wanted it to look beautiful. I wanted them to look good because we admired them so much. And I wanted you to see somebody when he was telling you a story, as opposed to, you know, showing you the footage and then you hear the voiceover. So I learned a lot about how to do the things I wanted to do that I didn't really know how to do before.
Jacob, doing the interviews, I have to say, you're really good at that. I mean, that's you know, it's not easy to interview people and to even though you're on their level, you know, two musicians, like you said, not a journalist, you don't have a pitch. But did you sort of have any sort of like prep to like, hey, I'm gonna interview these guys for a film, I better ask the right questions?
Well, yeah, certainly you know, we started with Eric. Eric was the first interview. And we had an idea of what we're doing, but that changes as soon as he gives us, you know, an hour or two of interview, then we get some information, and the story starts to evolve and starts to emerge. Because whatever we had in mind really is not where we wound up at all, because it was really dependent on what they told us. So, yeah, every time we went, it got more, I wouldn't say it got easier, but it became more clear as we went along what we needed. As the movie, the narrative became more clear.
What point did you feel like that it became more clear? When did you start to look at each other and go, okay, I think we have our movie now. I think we found the voice of the film.
Yesterday. No, you know, the song "Expecting to Fly" really frames the movie. And for me, that's the sort of defining thing of the era. You know, even in the title, you know, in the 60s, there was a sort of sense about no matter how crazy your dreams were, they could come true. And, you know, even in that, it's suggested in the title. And, you know, what we really know is that, you know, that kind of boundless optimism just doesn't last. And so in using that song to frame it, we were trying to, you know, suggest 3 eras of Laurel Canyon, because to us, that's what it was. There was the era of when all the bands came here, and they had multiple singers and multiple songwriters, like Beck says. And, you know, they all saw that dream of being in a Hard Day's Night. You know, they just wanted to be a bunch of guys running around, having a good time. And then after that, the psychedelic period in Laurel Canyon happens, and I think things change. And then after that, there's the retrenchment into sort of country rock, and you get the search for the individual, as Beck says, and it's more about the singer-songwriter, and that's when Joni Mitchell comes in, which is why we don't have Joni Mitchell in the film, because it's really just a specific period. So for us trying to get that together, I don't know what point, but there was a point where I said, oh wow, this song really does frame this film. I mean, it's about the end of a relationship, but we're using it as a metaphor, sort of about the end of an innocent period.
Jacob, the songs that you perform for the soundtrack, and especially in the film, you know, you're true to the sounds of the songs, like they're identifiable. You make them your own. Who you're duetting with. One of the songs that I sort of rediscovered watching the film and listening to the soundtrack earlier today was "Never My Love," which was beautiful. It was just such a beautiful, deeply moving song. Like, what, among the songs that we hear in the film, that we see in the film, what were the more challenging ones? Like, what did you have to work harder at to get the right tone for?
Anything Brian Wilson had written. Really. Well, because his instincts were otherworldly. I mean, that's, you know, as we've described before in different sit-downs like this, you know, the Beatles, they did have George Martin, and they had the Beatles. They had like 4 geniuses and George Martin. So maybe 5 geniuses. And a bunch of lab coats, and like, it was like a, I mean, to be a fly on that wall, there's plenty of books on that. But, you know, Brian did it alone, not just as an arranger and he had co-writers, but he had the Wrecking Crew. But he had a band that wasn't really equal to the Beatles by any stretch. I mean, as terrific as they were and they are, it's not the same thing. You know, he didn't have George Harrison to lean on, he didn't have Paul. So he had to orchestrate all this, he had to think it all up, and he had to get it executed. With a bunch of older people who that must have been, to me, I mean, I think most people, that'd be very intimidating. But Brian's confidence, I guess, allowed him to sit there and control these people and tell them what he wanted.
And it's so great in the scene in the film when you know, the musicians are in the studio and Brian just walks in and lays down the law that this is the chord, this is the key, boom, let's go. When you look at music scenes in cities around the world, you know, the last like 50 years, so I mean, you have Seattle, the grunge scene, you know, those bands inspiring each other. You know, you have obviously Liverpool, you know, with the Mersey beat sound. You have the San Francisco sound with the Jefferson Airplane and the Grateful Dead in the, you know, 66, 67. So, you know, the Laurel Canyon sound, the feel, the vibe, it just felt special. There was kind of a magic to it.
I mean, the Laurel Canyon sound is sort of defined by the 12-string orchestral sound that McGuinn has, and then the harmonies, because they're all trying to be like the Beatles. And you have the harmonies of, you know, the Byrds. The thing that you love the Byrds. I love the early period of the Byrds. I mean, I love it all, but that I love. And you know, when McGuinn and Gene Clark are singing together in unison, it creates a sound, and then Crosby sings over them, and it's two-part, and it's beautiful. But you know, in terms of the California sound, yeah, you have the Mamas and Papas, and they have those harmonies. I mean, one thing I would want to say is that, you know, the film is as much about the echo for me as it is about Laurel Canyon. Because, you know, yes, it's the echo of people's ideas and creativity going between them and the bands, and then between each other, and then between England. But really, what we have in LA that's amazing are the studios that we captured. And in each of those studios, there's an echo chamber. And, you know, that's what gives character to many things, and obviously the human voice. And many of those buildings that are there on Sunset may not be there in 10 years because of, you know, all the development to Hollywood. So when we went in there, because we worked in there, we just wanted to make them look beautiful, because they are beautiful. And Western, you know, is legendary, and Sunset Sound is legendary. And so I hope they're here. And they are part of our heritage and our culture. I hope nobody puts up a, I don't know, an In-N-Out burger or a chain.
The evolution. So many of these bands, so many of these musicians, they evolved 2 decades in a 2 or 3 year period. I mean, the Byrds go from Tambourine Man to Notorious Byrd Brothers, and then Sweetheart of the Rodeo, you know, obviously the Beatles, Rubber Soul, Revolver Pepper. I just love the influence and the inspiration, you know, the Byrds inspiring If I Needed Someone, and Rubber Soul inspiring Pet Sounds. And look, I mean, the folk rock sound of the Byrds and obviously the Beatles plugging in inspired, you know, Dylan to plug it in, Bob Dylan, you know, to plug it. So this, but do you think that, why was it such a short, so like you said, 2.5 year period, and then it just sort of seemed to just, you know, sort of fade off?
Well, look, in the film, we picked songs that Jacob could sing well. That's the first thing. But also that, you know, well, you have a singer, it's all about the singer. You know, it's, you take the Hippocratic oath as a record producer, you protect the patient, you save the patient. But, don't take that the wrong way. The songs in the film are sort of the defining moments in a way for the bands not being together. When you know, Go Where You Want to Go, Michelle tells you that they break up, you know, in a way because of her own attitudes towards a relationship. And, you know, the Byrds break up, maybe over going back, because Crosby tells us, you know, he was an asshole. And Springfield, even though Steven says, you know, they had great wealth of material, but it was divergent directions, it's really about expecting to fly when Neil sort of forges his own path. So we were trying to pick songs that would show you, here are these bands, and maybe here's why they broke up. And you know, David is so eloquent in the end when he says bands tend to devolve, you know, and that the collection of people coming together, and Regina, you know, sort of muses about, you know, how creative people, maybe when they're striving for their own individuality or greatness, they can't compromise.
One of the other things I love about the film is the intimacy of when, you know, you're all like sitting around looking at the classic albums, picking out the songs, you know, talking about the songs, like your occupation sort of drifted away. You were just music fans. You know, how was it? How much did you enjoy just being a fan and, you know, stripping away everything that goes with being a musician?
Okay, well, you're responding really positively to what's slightly an awkward scene, which we did get together and talk about these records, which you can see, but we also have cameras around, so we're trying to actually have this moment. But these are friends of mine, and these are conversations we had, and you know, it was actually nice. And we don't. Some of us here probably have LPs and turntables still, and if we do, somebody does. I know you do. Honestly, like I'm a fan of all. I don't care how we hear the music. I mean, yes, vinyl does sound better, just as long as you listen to the songs. I don't really care. Just, yes, I have a preference, but just listen to the songs. But it was kind of nice because I haven't done that in many years. To actually sit. I have a turntable and I have records, but I listen alone because there's really no social situation anymore to do that. So yeah, that situation, we are looking at the album covers, we're listening to them, and we are admiring. Every detail was just important, and you know, I know that when I listen to records now and I buy them, which is honestly just not as frequent as these used to because they cost like $30. You agree? I know you do. It used to be $6.99.
Yeah.
So what? So we buy the classics, but it's nice. It was nice to sit and talk about the records and admire every piece of them, every corner.
I just paid $30 for Band on the Run and Amoeba Records.
Okay, but you know, you already know you like that record. That's
Yeah,
a good investment.
that's why.
What about the new band that popped up? You like one song, you want to check that.
I'll just download
it. It costs too much.
Yeah, it's true. I want to open up to the audience for questions while we have a couple more minutes. And you know, there's a hand. Is that a hand? What's your question? And scream it nice and loud.
I'm a young
Okay, you got a mic, even better. See, this is how they roll at the Cinerama.
Okay, it's on. So I'm a young director, and I almost saw it at SBIFF, but I just want to ask you, what was your toughest moment as a director doing this film?
Did you say toughest or topless moment?
We do both.
That's a good question. You know, as a first-time director, they were all tough moments because I had never experienced any of it. Look, I was a journalist, so I knew how to write a treatment, which I did, and I was a record producer, so I knew how to make music. And, you know, I think in the end, the learning of everything, of how to go from offline to online. I thought when we had an offline picture, hey, this is great. And then I realized, holy shit, I have to take this thing now and rebuild it and then remix it, and then I have to mix it in 5.1. Wait a minute. I had a hard enough time deciding as a record producer what to put in 2 speakers. Now I got 5. So, you know, the whole process, but it was really amazing, and I just, you know, love that somebody gave me the opportunity to do it. I mean, these people were very stupid to give me this money, but maybe not, I don't know, you know. And just to your point, I went to another director to try to make this film. I went to 2. And, you know, one of the guys said, I like the idea, but I don't know. And then the other guy said, well, yeah, I need a couple $1 million. And so somebody said, well, you could do it for cheap, you could do it. And so that's how that happened.
Well, we're happy that you did it because it's awesome.
Yeah.
Another question? Yes, right in the back.
Seems to be a lack of mention of any of the political overarching issues going on in the 60s. Is there a reason that seems to have been left out?
You want to repeat that?
Yes, the question was why didn't the film get into the tumult and the politics at the time?
You know, I thought about it, But honestly, we wanted to make something that was just representative of the innocence and the kindness of that period. You know, we live in an age now where, you know, you feel good when the bad guy goes down, and it's like the era of the takedown, and you know, just that time just represented the thing of kindness and innocence. And you know, if we could make people just go away from the vicissitudes of their daily life and just 80 minutes or 90 minutes of, you know, of just escape into a time, maybe people would take a little bit of the kindness that's in the film and take it home with them and put it out to the world. So that's what we did.
Anyone, and another question. Give me another question. Come on, there's 800 people in this. Yes, in the beard. Stand up and scream your question. Wait, hang on, don't scream. Here comes a microphone.
Thanks. Do you think,
Talk into the mic.
Hello? Hello? Do you think that now that we're, you know, I think more connected, we're on the internet, we're sharing music, you can hear music whenever you want from wherever in the world. Do you feel like these kind of scenes or these kind of collectives or people cross-pollinating and saying that word over and over again? Do you feel like that's happening today in the same way? Or what is it about that time that was possible? Is it possible now? That's a long question, sorry.
It happened then, can it happen now? That's your question. Okay.
You know, I suppose in a different way. Yeah, you can send me your file. You want to send me a file? You look very talented. I don't want your file. But that's nice, and that is how people do it now. And that's how I do it. But that's just different. That's not, you're not sitting together and playing a song with somebody. We'll get it done. We are exchanging the ideas, but that part of it, they still do it. They call it like a guitar pull, you know. But it's orchestrated. It's kind of contrived. But this situation, walking around a local neighborhood like that, a canyon, I guess it could happen. I don't think it probably will, but it was that's all they had. If they wanted to share music, I mean, to go make some music and share it with somebody. Otherwise, you have to go get some 2-inch tape to go to a studio and spend some money and then give it to someone else. And they have to have the machine too. It wasn't going to work, so they just played it for each other.
So you're stuck on a deserted island, okay? And you can only have one album from that period of time, like between 65.
I'm going to interrupt you right away and just say, I can't stand this question. I can't stand it. I've been reading this desert island question for like 50 my
All
whole
right,
life.
throw it out to the audience.
And I also don't like Beatles or Stones. I don't like that choice either.
I wasn't going to
I
go
love
there.
them both.
Yeah, I'm
I vote for everybody.
Beatles, Beach Boys, Stones. What's your question? Wait, hang on. Come up here.
It's for Jacob.
Only desert island I'm going to is Manhattan, by the way.
It's a great film to both of you. I just wanted to ask Jacob, I know you had many amazing interviews. Which was an interview that you felt was most memorable to you, and why?
Thank you.
Oh, okay, thank you. You know, honestly, but even before, unfortunately, Tom's passing, it was already my favorite interview. It became even more poignant afterwards. But that was, you know, he was a really special character in my life and everybody's life too. But I was fortunate to spend time with him. But that was already my most favorite interview, and it's become more poignant afterwards. And you know, we've looked at it, and people kind of seem to want to grab every word and make maybe even more of it than is there. But he was a huge influence in my life as a musician, but as a person too. And I've spent a lot of time with a lot of that generation. And I've said before, not all of them are totally nice and encouraging. Some of them are actually awful. Totally awful. That's another movie.
The good, the bad, and the ugly.
Because I can't name names until you can only quote dead people in these contests. But he was wonderful. And I was lucky enough to, I mean, I realized the other night when talking here that it was such an impressionable time. He did define my job, more so maybe than anybody else, that I've wanted to do as a person in a band. That band and him, I was able to watch them when I was younger, and I'm still trying to emulate. I'm still trying to copy everything off that band and Tom. So he was kind to be my you know, when I was younger, but certainly more as an adult, when I got to spend more time with him. So the day was already my favorite day. Hopefully, does that answer that? Yeah. And everybody was terrific, but Tom was special to me, really.
So ladies and gentlemen, now that you've all seen the film and you're about to see the band, so you got to spread the word. And how do you do that these days? Social media. right?
Get on the phone, call
So-
your friend.
Get on the phone, well, you can do that, but you can also go on Twitter, you can go on Facebook, go on Instagram. I don't know, you in the back, if you're still using MySpace, that's totally cool. But spread the word about Echo and the Canyon, and most importantly, download, listen, buy the album, whatever it takes, you're going to love it. You want to hear some music? Let's do this. Thank you, Andrew Jacob.